We all get that baby boomers are a lot older than most listening to this video, but in a lot of ways you'd think that they'd be able to pour wisdom into the youth because of their age, and some do, but it mostly seems like there's a lack of wisdom at times when it comes to the baby boomers. And I wanted to take a second to explain why I'm pressing the mute button on a lot of the boomers that try to talk on the younger generation. The first thing is that boomers, they hang on to everything. They own almost everything in society, so it's really hard to overcome that when you're looking to break into ownership positions or positions of leadership as a younger person. And just an example too, if you look at the split of the stock market and who owns those positions, it's kind of crazy. Like, boomers have so much of the stock market, they have so much of the investments, they own so many of the houses. I think that's why young people just really don't care when there's like these stock market crashes that is covered by news, is covered by a lot of people as a big deal. But then, a lot of young people are like, what did I even lose? Nothing. I didn't lose my retirement or anything. And it's literally at a point too where congressmen and women, like, they die in office. I think there was a story recently where somebody died in office, and this is speaking more on the power too. Boomers, especially with power, they just don't let it go. And I feel like this wasn't something that often happened unless you're like assassinated as a prior leader, of course, in office, or you're still kind of considered young back in other societies and stuff. People just literally drop dead if you're a baby boomer in office. You do not let it go. And I think this is part of the reason, like, why people get so annoyed and frustrated too with leadership in general, because it's the same generation making old and tired decisions that we've already seen before, because that's all they know. They're very stubborn. Like, boomers, they don't come off their opinions, they don't come off whatever they're thinking, so they kind of keep doing that same thing regardless, and that's why it's just frustrating. And not to be a political thing, I mean, I could talk some politics right now on my opinions, but I'll stay away from that. But just explaining it to a wider audience here and something everybody's going to know, you look at the two past presidents here in the United States, including the one right now, so Trump and Biden, and it's like Biden, they literally got to the point they had to drag this, like, come to Jesus moment, drag this dude out of the running after he was already extremely old to win the presidency, and you had questions then, so that happens. Then Trump, like, this dude is already going on into the 80s, way up there in age too, and you'd think, the average retirement age maybe is like 65, probably younger for somebody who would have everything like Trump before he even ran and came down the escalator, and yet here we are. It's just, again, power, and people hang on to it forever. It's kind of right in that same trope. And a good example of this delusion is there's a person that's very close to me in my life that is a boomer. I'll just say that, a family member. And guys, like, keep in mind, this person, not the most disciplined, but I remember at one point overhearing a conversation that just the delusion was off the charts. Was basically speaking to another boomer and said, look, I think it's it's kind of a jokingly throughout, like, maybe we should have a draft again just to get kids, or a mandatory military service. Maybe we should have mandatory military service just to teach these kids some discipline. And it's like, just the delusion of that is off the charts, because this person still living paycheck to paycheck despite being in their 60s, just not disciplined in the slightest, financially in the worst shape you could pretty much possibly be in, is losing limbs and parts of his limbs to diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which has been uncontrolled. And not only that, got diagnosed with it and didn't even do a lick of work to even try to change the diet that caused it, still buys the junk food and eats it, pretty much ignores the fact that you have that, despite literally, again, dying and losing limbs, cannot make a change due to addiction that is that crippling to the bad foods, to the bad habits, doesn't make any attempt to work out. And I could say a lot of other things, but even those two alone should tell you everything to know. Those two facts, basically, about their life, I should tell you everything to know. And this person, like the other boomer, very stubborn, just, like other boomers, very stubborn, just does not change opinions. It's like, how just delusional do you have to be to even throw out a statement like that and be serious? And this is the kind of crap we're talking about. And the other thing is that a lot of boomers, second main point here, a lot of boomers, they just don't want their kids to succeed as much as them. And it's kind of wild. Like, there's a crowd of boomer parents, they just resent their kids, and they just feel like they're an annoying nuisance. To be honest, this has always happened to be the case. Like, you do have to speak to that. In some ways, there's some people, like, if they don't want to bear a child, they're going to be terrible towards the child. They will not help them out, and it's really a sad situation. They'll kind of run away. There's a lot of fathers that have, unfortunately, men that are not leading, they'll abandon basically the child. But with the boomers, they'll be involved. I guess they'll be there, but then it's like they actively hate and dismiss their children when they don't succeed, especially when they don't succeed in whatever they're doing. But then they act like it's not at least a partial reflection of their parenting, like they weren't the one raising the kid. So maybe if the kid didn't take off like they had expected, you might have to look inward instead of at them. Also, probably the third main point here, and just we got to talk about boomers. They grew up in such a different time period, and I just feel like it was so much easier to succeed in a lot of the milestones back then than it is now. And then they because of that, they just love materialistic things that they've been able to acquire because of this. Now, boomers, you know, they love to brag about what they have, their portfolio, and I think this has almost led to a lot of weird and disturbing spending at the end of their lives. I'm not sure if anyone else has seen this. I'm sure you have if you've watched any YouTube, maybe even some of the similar interests as me, but there's a lot of these communities that are spawning now where it's like boomers, they just go and like spend money in retirement and do weird things, and it's just, I don't think it was a normal thing in society's past. Let me know if I'm wrong on this, but a good example is the Villages in Florida. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but it's basically, it's like a retirement community but on drugs, like wild and out, and people are doing crazy stuff there and obviously spending a lot of money and just kind of living it up, whereas like you think of retirement and by the time you're ready to like, you know, really settle, you're very old, you can barely take care of yourself. Like a lot of people, you think like nursing homes or just, you know, they're sitting at home, kind of like these people are out there living it up, buying new houses, doing this and that, and that's kind of representative, I think, of the boomer generation. Now, it is true that boomers, you have to be fair, they don't have the knowledge or the same advantages that we do in stuff like technology, and that could of course boost your life to know how to use a computer really well. But certainly when they first came out, boomers didn't adapt to that, and younger people could because they grew up with it. So I'm not speaking as if they didn't have any of those difficulties and problems to overcome. However, with the precedent of like home ownership, good salaries and jobs, lower inflation, affordable and fruitful lives, it's just hard to want to bring more people into this world when you won't be able to provide those same similar standards of what you grew up experiencing. And of course, the idea is always for the next generation to be set up even better than yours. So that's where I'm talking about, where obviously I think boomers that just grew up in such a different time period, for those milestones that I just mentioned, those felt a little easier to acquire than they are now. And that's what makes it so like just hard to really follow any of the advice that you're getting from the older generations and the baby boomers. And I could really go on about this and some of the other issues, but how do I think we fix this issue? I just say that you really need to weigh the opinions of younger people way more, and even if there are literally a lot less young people, you still need to seek out, I think, that advice and advice from peers. And back in the day, like, you might have valued your parents' opinion a little bit more, but just with the situation where it is, with boomers being even older too, you got to keep in mind they had children a lot technically older than people did in the past, so it's like they're even less relatable. Just specifically if you grew up with a boomer parent or two, it's like you gotta get good friends to ask, get maybe even extended family members to ask like serious stuff, or if you're looking for advice or anything like that, like, because it's just something about the boomers, man, and some of the advice, again, from some of them is just not there. It's just totally out of touch, and it's really not going to help you. So you want to seek out just younger opinions, in my perspective, and you do want to keep in mind, you don't want to be resentful of older people and the boomers. It's just, to be honest, it's likely that Gen Z and millennials like us will be out of touch our children once, you know, we're in our 50s and 60s and beyond. So this is probably just something where it's just the realities of cycles of new people. But just be careful beating yourself up too much, and this is the main problem with really taking that advice or really trying to listen too much to boomers. You don't want to beat yourself up too much over their take on your situation, over their opinion on your situation, because it's just obvious at this point that a lot of them cannot put themselves in your shoes. Due to that fact, it really miscues what's going on and the problems that you're ultimately facing. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Did you get raised by boomers? How much of their advice are you taking? You know, what do you kind of really do about this? Because I just view it as a point where it's like I just can't anymore. And again, you know, everybody's got their problems, but the baby boomers, I feel like it is an interesting thing to study. I'll see you guys in the next video. That'll be out soon.